Have you ever asked yourself this question? Why do some Christians pray faithfully, attend church for decades, serve diligently, and yet remain stuck in financial struggle year after year? They love God. They read the Bible. They worship sincerely. And still, the cycle never seems to break. This message is not about blaming anyone, and it is not about financial tricks, investments, or how to get rich fast. What we are talking about today goes much deeper. Because for many believers, ongoing financial struggle is not merely a money problem. It is a spiritual one. The Bible teaches us that there are invisible realities shaping visible outcomes, and finances are no exception. Proverbs 22:7 tells us that the borrower is slave to the lender. That verse is not just economic advice, it is spiritual truth. Debt is not only pressure on the wallet, it places pressure on the soul. Financial bondage slowly erodes confidence. It weakens bold prayer. It drains spiritual passion. And over time, it causes believers to lower their expectations of what God can do through their lives. Many Christians still worship. They still serve. But deep down, they live cautiously, anxiously, always worried about money. And that fear is not harmless. Satan does not always attack faith directly. Often, he uses financial anxiety to quietly bind believers, limit their obedience, and keep them from fully stepping into God's calling. If someone prays and worships, yet constant fear about money never leaves their heart, that fear is not just a personality trait. It is a sign of spiritual captivity. Scripture tells us clearly that money itself is not evil, but the love of money is. 1 Timothy 6:10 says that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Not money, but the heart's attachment to it. And that attachment usually grows from two roots, greed and fear. Greed whispers that we never have enough. Fear shouts that we might lose what we have. Greed pushes us to chase more. Fear causes us to cling tightly. Together they distort our thinking, control our decisions, and quietly replace trust in God with dependence on money. This is why financial freedom does not begin with earning more. It begins with breaking these roots. God repeatedly says in Scripture, "Do not fear." Isaiah 41:10 says, "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God." That promise is not limited to emotional struggles or persecution. It applies to finances too. Yet many believers still live by calculations, forecasts, and worst-case scenarios. They trust spreadsheets more than Scripture. They plan as if God might fail them. And when fear rules the heart, generosity becomes difficult, obedience becomes selective, and faith becomes conditional. At that point, what is needed is not a new financial strategy. What is needed is a spiritual declaration. A declaration spoken not to convince God, but to confront the lies shaping the heart. I am not a slave to debt. I am not owned by money. I am a child of God. Truth is powerful because Satan cannot stand against it. Jesus said, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Truth does not deny financial reality. It breaks spiritual bondage within that reality. Many believers try to change their circumstances without addressing the spiritual roots beneath them. They work harder, earn more, and still feel trapped. Because without spiritual freedom, financial freedom never lasts. Even when someone experiences a spiritual awakening, financial bondage often returns. Why? Because daily habits quietly rebuild the chains. God's economic system has always been clear. From Genesis onward, Scripture shows us that we reap what we sow, that obedience leads to blessing, and that generosity opens the door to provision. Yet many Christians know these principles intellectually, but do not live by them practically. One common pattern is partial obedience. Malachi chapter 3 speaks clearly about bringing the full tithe. God promises to open the windows of heaven and pour out blessing. But fear causes many to hesitate. They calculate. They delay. They tell themselves they will obey later, when things feel safer. But small disobedience hardens into long-term bondage. Another pattern is unfaithfulness in small things. Jesus said that those who are faithful with little will be faithful with much, but careless spending, wasted opportunities, and inconsistency in small responsibilities prevent God from entrusting greater blessing. It is not that God is unwilling to give. Often, the vessel is unprepared. Another habit that strengthens bondage is lack of contentment. 1 Timothy tells us that godliness with contentment is great gain. Without contentment, no amount of money ever feels like enough. More income simply creates more anxiety. More possessions create more pressure. Comparison replaces gratitude, and joy disappears. Fear of giving is another powerful chain. Jesus said, "Give, and it will be given to you." Yet many believers hold back because they fear lack. But fear shuts the channel of provision. Generosity is not optional in God's economy. It is how the system functions. Finally, impatience plays a major role. Scripture says that we will reap in due time if we do not give up. But impatience pushes people into debt, risky decisions, and shortcuts. They follow the pace of the world instead of waiting for God's timing. And slowly, the noose tightens. Financial freedom is not primarily about how much you earn. It is about how you live. Freedom begins when habits change, when obedience replaces delay, when faithfulness replaces carelessness, when contentment replaces comparison, when generosity replaces fear, when patience replaces urgency. This path does not always lead to instant wealth, but it always leads to peace. It leads to clarity. It leads to freedom. God does not simply want his children rich. He wants them free. Free from fear. Free from anxiety. Free from slavery to money. Now the chains are visible. The habits are clear. The choice is no longer hidden. Will you continue living under fear, repeating the same cycles? Or will you step into God's economy with trust and obedience? God has already spoken. Do not fear. I am with you. I am your God. When this promise is truly embraced, financial bondage loses its authority. Today is not about perfection. It is about decision. And that decision can change everything.